Texting you as I get the tomorrow. As soon as I did that, the insurance started. It's been a while. 3 years or 5 years. John Is he really? Yes, it is. Yeah. Work with me at Northwest. It's hard to go I love this. It is. There's fewer of us. Sometimes it's Are you talking to industry people or are you talking to citizens? All of them. We got it. Good to see you later. Thank you. Good talking. How was that? We got 9:30. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Doug, you need us to roll call?
Yes. Tim Andrus.
Here.
Ryan Bale. John Byron. Kurt Campbell. Andra.
Present.
Debbie Farmer.
Here.
Charlie Sutton. Aaron Cavazos. Steve Metzler. Terrell Graham. Vic Hildebrand.
Here.
Tom Youngman.
Here.
Aaron Teague. Jason Ammerman.
Here.
Scooter Mangold.
Here.
Andrew McBride.
Here.
Daniel Meyer. Gary Middleton. Travis Prusky.
Present.
Donovan Burton for Robert Puente.
Here.
Vanessa Pugh Williams. Humberto Ramos. Weldon Riggs.
Here.
Roland Ruiz.
Here.
Daryl Brownlow.
Here.
Darren Simmons, Mitchell Sowers,
Here.
Jonathan Stinson,
Here.
Tom Taggart,
Here.
Mike Shortfer, Ryan Kelso,
Here.
Diane Wasenick,
Here.
Adam Yablonsky,
Here.
Dan Yoxel, Carly Rotzler,
Here.
Tony Franklin,
Present. Good morning.
Tom Hegemeyer,
Here.
Ileana Delgado, Don McGee, Michelle Foss,
Here.
Charles Wiedenfeld, Jamie McCool, Carl Kroll.
All right, thank you, Doc. And then, do we have any public comment? I'm not aware of any. Okay, so no public comments. Does anybody have any public comments that didn't sign up and wants to talk? Okay, so moving on to item 3, approval of minutes from the previous meeting, South Central Texas Regional Water Planning Group. Anybody have any comments on the minutes? Motion to approve. Second. Anyone object to approving the minutes? We will pass the minutes as presented by consensus. Ms. Foss, I think you're online. You're up for item number 4, status report, communications by Texas Water Development Board.
Yes, good morning, everybody. Few updates from the board. First off, the July 23rd board meeting saw presentation of the projects that had applied for SWIFT funding. All 3 of the projects that were submitted from Region L for SWIFT funding were approved. Alliance Regional Water Authority's Phase 1B, Canyon Regional Water Authority's Hayes-Caldwell Water Treatment Plant Expansion Project, and GBRA's Carrizo Groundwater Supply Project were all approved for SWIFT funding. So congratulations, a lot of money out the door for some much needed projects. Region L's 2021 Regional Water Plan Amendment for GBRA's Lower Basin Storage Project is on the agenda and expected to be considered during the August 15th board meeting. And a reminder that the following data is located in the conservation dashboard that I reviewed in the last meeting. You can find gallon per capita day statistics. You can find gallons per capita day trends and targets. And you can find BMPs and projects that are all in the state water plan within that dashboard. And then I have a few items that I'm sure everybody's really, really excited to hear about. And that is also at the July 23rd board meeting, we considered the Texas Water Fund Implementation Plan. And this is related to the new Water for Texas fund related to Senate Bill 28, Senate Joint Resolution 75, and Prop 6. So we sought stakeholder feedback through surveys, invitations for public comment at board and stakeholder meetings, and we had a dedicated email inbox from January through April of this year. We had 3 different surveys that folks were invited to take. One focused solely on financial assistance for water infrastructure projects. One focused on the new water supply for Texas fund itself. And then one focused on the statewide water public awareness program. And if you're interested in all of the feedback from that, it is summarized in the board item memorandum, which you can find on our website. It's about 11 pages long, but essentially a lot of the feedback was centered around the need for additional funding mechanisms for smaller and rural systems. And you'll see a breakdown on the next slide that I'll go through in just a minute. Also during the board meeting, our implementation plan was released that's going to address statutory directives and our responses to stakeholder feedback. The plan is flexible and somewhat subject to change right now, but you'll see in our timeline on the last slide. I'll go over that with you. We've got another probably 5 to 6 months where we're going to be working through aspects of the plan. And you can receive additional feedback, not only from talking to myself and other folks at the Water Development Board, but you can get on our email list as well. Next slide. So here are the proposed funding allocations. We have a substantial chunk that is proposed for the Rural Water Assistance Fund. We've got a bit of money that is set aside, tentatively set aside for 100% grant for entities that are under 1,000 population. And then we've got additional monies that are set aside for 90% grant, 10% loan or local match, and then some additional money set aside for high risk or need projects at 100% grant level. And that totals up to $195 million. Then the Water Loan Assistance Fund, which is the general funding bucket that most of our funding programs fall under. We've got money set aside for 70% grant, 30% loan or local match for conservation or water loss projects for the 2025 state revolving fund solicitation period, looking at entities that are in the 10,001 to 150,000 population range. We've got $300 million set aside for SWIFT program support. The minimum amount of $250 million for the new Water Supply for Texas Fund. We've got $150 million set aside for additional funding for other existing financial assistance programs that we run, and then $15 million for the statewide public awareness program, totaling up $1 billion. Next slide. So here's our proposed schedule. We brought the plan to the board, and those board items were approved for committing the monies for the Rural Water Assistance Fund and the SWIFT program commitments and the Texas new Water Supply for Texas Fund. We have invitations that are going out to entities that we know already have high-risk projects coming up, and we've posted a prioritization schedule for projects up for public comment that will be up for about another week or so. In August, we have rule proposals that will be under consideration at the August 15th board meeting, and we'll be sending out invitations for Rural Water Assistance Fund projects. And then later on this fall and this winter, we're going to be doing some additional rule consideration for these programs and the statewide public awareness campaign contract. Any questions?
I have a question.
Yeah.
I don't know what high risk projects means.
High risk projects are typically associated with smaller rural entities that are either single source of supply, meaning that in times of drought, they don't have an interconnect, or essentially they would be resorting to trucking in water. And we've had some situations like that in droughts previously. Entities that have fallen under the TCEQ's 180-day remaining supply list, at least once, if not multiple times, etc.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Any other questions?
You talked about ag grants, 100% for populations under 1,000. And these ag projects aren't going to be done within the city.
No, those weren't referring to ag grants. Those were the Rural Water Assistance Fund. The ag grants are a separate program. And we did receive money from the previous legislature to continue funding the ag conservation grants and the ag conservation loan programs.
All right, thank you.
Okay.
What else? Thank you, Michelle.
All right. Thank y'all.
All right, well, moving on to item number 5, status reports and communications related to regional water plan, including reports by the chair, regional liaison, groundwater management area representatives, and members of the planning group. I don't have a report at this time, so anybody from the regional liaisons have a report? Anybody from the groundwater management area? Ronald? Yes.
I've got a report, GMA 13. We had a GMA 13 meeting on June 14th in Pleasanton at the Evergreen office. Kind of an update. The southern portion of the GAM, which is the Carrizo, Wilcox, Queen City, Sparta, all of which play a role, of course, in regional water supply availability and strategies. This is kind of where we're at. GMA 13's consultant, Mr. Bill Hutchison, Dr. Hutchison, presented that proposed schedule for the timeline of the DSCs, and it's still set for May 1st, 2026, with adoption by January 5th, 2027. So obviously, the GMA 13 GAM DSCs won't be effective for this round of planning. It'll fall into the 2031 plans. So Dr. Hutchison also stated that any new revised calibrations for the GAM, they've not been completed. The recalibration of the GAM for the Southern Carrizo will include new aquifer transmissivity data, as well as groundwater conservation district pumping estimates from Dimmitt, Frio, LaSalle, Webb, and Zavala counties. So there's a great deal of work going into this new GAM, including the work that Impera is doing for the Evergreen regarding transmissivities across the GAM. across the southern Carrizo. But that won't affect anything we do for the 2026 water plan. That all rolls to 2031. But there will be significant changes, which is quite interesting because we know there are going to be some pretty significant impacts as a result of the GAM remodel and recalibration. But it's not anything that we're going to be able to do anything about until the 2031 water. I bring this up because it was an interesting discussion regarding the proposal by an organization out of Webb County and called Legacy Water Supply Corp. And it's interesting in that from GMA 13, they are in, Webb County is part of GMA 13. They have a large water supply project that they're proposing as part of Region M's water plan. But Webb County does not have a groundwater district. And so they want the GAM of the Southern Carrizo GAM and GMA 13 to include their pumping project in there to be modeled as part of that. And so it sets up an interesting dynamic that will play itself out over the course of the next year or two as we GAMs, the GMAs struggle with non-GCD entities that want to be part of the GAM because of the necessity for being in the regional water plan to apply for SWIFT funding. So it's this dynamic that's working out. And I'm not speaking pro or against anything to do. It's a very interesting project, but it's a significant amount of water coming out of the Southern Carrizo Dam, which affects a lot of things. And so there's going to be some really interesting developments as we pursue, specifically with this project, but the mechanism by which the GMA will make decisions on DFCs and model labeled groundwater based upon entities that are not water districts, but in that GMA. And this is a separate region from what we're dealing with here now. That kind of concluded my report, but I thought you guys might find that interesting. Kind of interesting dynamic that's developing there.
Yeah. Anyone else? Any other GMA representatives? Any general members have an update or someone wants to talk about something, Mr. Chance? All right, so let's move on to item number 6, consideration of appropriate action regarding briefings on workshop activities. Ms. Gonzalez?
Sure. It's not really sure. Okay. Technical difficulties solved. Okay. Good morning. I'm Lauren Gonzalez. I'm with Rocky Beach. We have several members of our team here today, including Laura Ron with Laura Ron PR. We've got Christine Westerman with SWCA, A few members from our team at Block and Beach, including Alicia Smiley and Casey Jacobson, and then on the line we've got Jamie Burke. So starting off with agenda item 6, this is just an overview of the work group meetings that we've had since our main meeting. The first work group is the Chapter 8 Policy and Legislative Recommendations work group, and I'll give a bit more information on the following slide, and then the Rural Community Outreach work group. So the Chapter 8 Policy and Legislative Recommendations work group has met 2 times since the main meeting, and the main thrust has been discussion of newer proposed recommendations and revisions to existing Chapter 8 language. The next meeting will actually be held today in this room at 1:30. You're welcome to attend. And the plan is to finalize Chapter 8 and then present to you all at the November meeting. Now, the Rural Community Outreach Work Group has also met twice since the main meeting. And the main discussion here has been identifying and developing water management strategies that could benefit rural entities. Now, given the length of this presentation, there are 115 slides. So for the sake of brevity, I did not elaborate on the extensive efforts that this work group has undertaken. It included outreach, coordination, efforts involved with all of these different meetings. And given the extensive effort, I wanted to extend gratitude and acknowledgement of many of the members of the work group, especially Travis Krusky, Adam Jablonski, Mr. Tim Andrus, and Kai Castillo with San Antonio Borough Authority. The efforts that went into this included, we invited 50 plus people to these work group meetings, including Soil and Water Conservation Board members, the Texas Department of Agriculture, Texas Parks and Wildlife Department. We also coordinated with the Texas AgriLife Research Group to make sure that we were developing strategies that were accurate and appropriate for the region, especially for the counties for which there are identified needs. So the work group developed and finalized methodologies for several strategies, which we'll discuss in subsequent slides. And those include the irrigation conservation strategy, the irrigation drought management strategy, and also rainwater harvesting. At this time, there are no additional meetings that are scheduled. And that summarizes agenda item 6. Are there any questions? If not, may I move on to item 7?
Yes, ma'am.
Great. So this is consideration of appropriate action regarding presentation by us regarding the schedule and progress updates. So we have 7 different items to discuss under this particular agenda topic. The first one is scheduled progress. This is the zoomed out version of the 5-year conceptual schedule with all of the different tasks on the left side. And we are now in Q3 of 2024, and as you can see, there are lots of overlapping tasks, so meaning we have many tasks that we're working on simultaneously, including water management strategy evaluations in task 5. We will be starting on the Chapter 6, impacts of the plan and cumulative effects. Chapter 7, drought response info. Task 8, the policy recommendations. Task 9, implementation of these comparisons to the previous plans. And task 10, of course, extends throughout the life cycle of this project. Zooming into this year's anticipated schedule, and today's meeting topics are mainly updates on water management strategies, drought contingency plans, and others. At the November 7th meeting, we will continue the discussion about water management strategies. We'll finalize and present the second and the last block of strategies, and then provide you all the opportunity to consider and review those strategies and then recommend them for inclusion in the plan, so that we can then take that information and do the cumulative effects analysis of all of those recommended strategies, the impact of those strategies in 2080 on natural resources. And so once we do that cumulative effects analysis, we will come back in January 2025. We'll present that cumulative effects analysis. We'll also present Chapter 9, the implementation and comparison to the previous plan. And then we'll provide updates on the remaining chapters. We typically have meetings every quarter. We have already discussed that we are going to basically move the quarter 2 meeting up to February. So at the February meeting, we will then present the entire plan to you all for your review and consideration and adoption of the initially prepared plan, or IPP. And then once we do that, there will be a long period of time where there will be opportunities for public comment and input. The plan will then go out to different state agencies for their review and comment and input. The board will provide comments on the IPP, and then we will come back in August, review those comments, and discuss how to address them for inclusion in the final plan, which will be discussed at the October meeting and adopted at the October meeting, and that will be the final plan. Are there any questions on schedule? Okay, update on completed efforts. Again, this is a long presentation. I'm sorry you have to listen to me as long as you will. I'm trying to break it up by bringing Alicia so that you can take a break from your ears. So, update on completed efforts. We completed task 3 of the water supplies evaluation. At the February meeting, we talked about the technical memorandum. We submitted it in March. It was declared administratively complete. And then on June 3rd, we received informal comments from the Texas Water Development Board. That is included in your agenda packets as handout A. In short, none of the comments require immediate action from the planning group. Most of them are just approvals and a few actions that we need to take for inclusion in the IPP and the final plan, and then some other minor discussions about moving forward with some of the supplies. And then we submitted the draft minor amendment to the board, and as Michelle mentioned, the minor amendment will be up for consideration by the Texas Water Development Board at the August 15th board meeting. And then moving on to new or ongoing efforts, we will be providing you all draft chapters for your review and comment, and you can expect an email from us in the coming weeks and months to provide instructions on how to review those and provide comments to us. And then we will be continuing evaluations of water management strategies. We sent emails to sponsors from the previous sponsors of strategies from the previous plan to request any updates to the schedule, the approach, infrastructure, yield, and so forth. We then also solicited input for new strategies from as many people as we could get. And then we started reviewing, we're calling it block 1 and block 2 of the water management strategies. So basically half of the strategies we've reviewed and evaluated, and we'll be presenting on later this meeting. We are working on chapter 7, and that includes, that's the drought response information. We are gathering and reviewing drought contingency plans, and we will be providing additional info in subsequent slides. We are continuing drafting chapter 8. Again, we will have a work group meeting later on today after this meeting in this room. And our plan is to continue developing that chapter, finalizing it, and then presenting it to you all at the November meeting. We are continuing our regional coordination and of course continuing rural outreach. One thing that we've done since the May meeting is we compiled addresses for all of these, for I think it was 120 or so rural entities, and we wrote them letters for snail mail, sent them via snail mail that provides information on regional water planning in general, and then Region L in particular, and then also provided information on their specific county in which they reside. And then Michelle Fox of the Texas Water Development Board and I served on the Nueces River Basin Summit in Corpus Christi last month to discuss regional water planning and encourage engagement. Moving on to drought contingency plans. You guys have seen this slide a few times now. Background is that we are required to gather and review drought contingency plans that are those that are required to be submitted to the TCEQ. And those TCPs must be updated every 5 years. And we're required to gather those, review them, and then describe the drought management measures in each. And so far we've been coordinating with San Antonio River Authority to gather and compile them. We've been sending emails to people requesting any outstanding DCPs. And then we will continue doing outreach on gathering those outstanding DCPs. For those that we don't have, we will coordinate with TCEQ to obtain those, because sometimes entities will submit them to the TCEQ, but not to us. And so sometimes they have some that we don't. And then we'll review, evaluate, and present you all in November. What we're asking you to do now, Regional Water Planning Group members, we're asking you all to reach out to your network to request these. In some instances, we do not have contact information for these entities. We've done exhaustive searches. And in some instances, they just haven't been able to provide them to us yet. And so this is a summary of all the entities that are required to submit DCPs to us. There are a total of 38 entities. And so far, we've received 30, which is pretty good. There are still 8 that are outstanding. So we've got about 81% of our DCPs received so far. The ones in orange indicate the ones that are outstanding. So if you all have contacts at these ones, if you could please reach out to them and request that they submit them to the San Antonio River Authority, specifically if you can do it electronically or via mail too. And I very much appreciate those of you, SAWS, Umberto, for reaching out and to many of the entities. Since the staff work group meeting a couple of weeks ago, we've received a few additional ones. So thank you for reaching out to your network, and yes, you all also extend invitations to your network to get these DCPs. Are there any questions? Yes, sir.
I've got a question. You're on the roll, but let me go back to task number 3, task number 5. Can you give us an example or percentage? Task number 3 is the initial survey we sent out. How many WUGs did we reach out with the survey? I'll always ask a question. And then task 5 is with regards to emails and the water management strategies. How many have received and how many are coming back again? So we have an idea as to what percentage of WUGs and water management strategies are reaching so that will be effective?
Yeah. Okay, so the question was, what is essentially our response rate for our outreach efforts for task 3, existing supply requests, and also task 5, water management strategies? So our initial effort was to send surveys out that included both of those tasks, and that was in December. And I think we received somewhere in the neighborhood of upper 30s responses from WUGs, and that was very helpful. And then we also reached out to the previous major water providers, like wholesale water providers, separately, not in survey form. And then the next thing I can't necessarily quantify. It was a lot of individual outreach to people, into WUGs at like, the Nueces Basin Summit, handing out my card and saying, please give me your water management strategies, you can get money. And other times it was, I've seen requests for bids on ZipCast, or I see things just in the media about people having needs or infrastructure projects, and I reach out to them individually and I say, hey, I see that you're working on, your council just approved a new well or something along those lines. Can you please, if you want to submit a strategy, this is how you do it. So that's not necessarily quantifiable, but, and then I also provided a few draft emails to then send to, several regional water planning group members for them to then extend, invitations to solicit strategies from their own networks. So, that kind of summarizes the different outreach efforts associated with this, well, mainly with the water management strategies. There was a bit more with the supplies.
I've got a follow-up question on that. With regards to what the Water Development Board started about the Water for Texas, that fund, will those projects have to be in regional plan? How is that going to be determined? So I guess the effort would be, if there is some interest from others who are not part of regional now, that we need to reach out to them, and I guess we have, but again, just keep that in the back of our mind, within our community, within our counties, within our friends, if they didn't apply, there's a possibility of getting funds to not regional. So how do we coordinate those efforts? Just a question.
Okay. Michelle, did you hear that question?
I heard part of it.
Okay, I think, to summarize, the question was, in order to get the Texas Water Fund funding, does an entity's project need to be included in the regional water plan?
Depends on the project and depends on the funding. If an entity is wanting to pursue SWIFT funding, it specifically needs to be identified in the regional water plan and in the state water plan. For all of our other funding programs, the source of water needs to be consistent in the plans, but does not have to be explicitly identified as a project. So is that helpful?
Is there part of your question?
I mean, the answer is that it's indeterminate, but, yeah, just every effort we can make, if the community, the region needs monies from Texas Water Fund, to be part of that, and so forth. Just want that to be back to
Okay.
as this program morphs and changes and becomes what it is, we're aware of that. We do more of it.
And I received an update. In terms of the survey responses we received, we got upwards of 50 survey responses, and then plus the individual outreach we did to major water providers. So probably it's around 60. Moving on to item E, significant identified needs. So this has been added since the staff work group meeting. And the significant identified needs is a somewhat new requirement just in the last 5 years or so. It was a new requirement in the last plan. So the legislature requires that planning groups provide a specific assessment in the plan of the potential for aquifer storage and recovery projects to meet, quote, significant identified needs. And so the planning groups must choose a definition, usually a threshold, to identify what qualifies as a, quote, significant identified need. In the last plan, the planning, you all, regional planning group, defined significant identified needs as a WUD or use type with an identified need of 10,000 acre feet or greater. And then based on that, there were 6 entities that were identified as having significant identified needs. 4 of those were municipal, and then there were 2 use types that exceeded the 10,000 acre feet per year, which were mining and irrigation. And so we provided specific assessments for each of those entities. However, for those 2 that are non-municipal, the specific assessment was essentially because of the distributed nature of those WUGs, it is unlikely that there is much potential for an ASR project. It seems as though there are other cost-effective and more targeted strategies that would be preferable over ASR, essentially. And so what we're asking you all to do today is to help us define, or to define rather, what constitutes a significant identified need. And so I've provided a few different options. You all may choose to do a completely different option, but I've tried to encompass a few different options that I thought you all might want or appreciate. So option one would be taking the definition from the last cycle and applying it to this cycle. And so there are 16 WUGs. Excuse me. Option one is just any need, regardless of whether it's municipal. So it includes manufacturing and irrigation, mining, and so forth. And so there are 16 WUGs that qualify as having needs greater than 10,000 acre feet per year by 2080. Option two is then a little bit more targeted, and it's specifically for municipal needs. So it basically strips out the county, or strips out the manufacturing, irrigation, mining, and then only includes municipal WUGs. And that shown here, it also includes county others. So option two has 11 WUGs. And then option three is only looking at municipal needs, but increasing that threshold from 10 to 15,000 acre feet per year. And using that definition, it results in 8 WUGs. And also that includes 2 county other WUGs for Hayes and Macomb County. Option four is increasing that threshold to 20,000 acre feet per year, still only looking at municipal needs. And that includes 3 WUGs, including 1 county other for Hayes County. So we ask that you all discuss and provide input and give us some direction on which option of these or another option you'd like us to use as the definition for significant identified needs. Yes, Mr. Andrews.
Well, what is the significance of a WUG being identified as one of these or not?
So the significance is that basically, once we define that definition, then we have to do a specific assessment as to whether or not ASR could meet those needs. So last cycle, it was in BU, in SAWS, and MBU SAWS, Victoria, and a few others. And for those, the significant, or the specific evaluation was essentially, these entities already have an ASR. So not much to do there. But for San Marcos was one that doesn't currently have an ASR project, but we looked at reports from the Texas Water Development Board and others about the ability, likelihood, the potential of ASR in that region based on hydrogeology and so forth. And there is potential for it. It was basically the evaluation for San Marcos. Oh, and one other thing I need to note, when we're talking about significant identified needs, these are the needs before water management strategies are applied. So this isn't unmet needs here. This is basically the first year, before conservation, before drought management, for any strategies. These are just quote identified needs for the capital.
I'm sorry, let me follow up on my question. Beyond it identifying the amount of work that has to be done in this assessment, what's the impact if you just get highlighted in the plan? Yeah, you potentially benefit from ASR.
I think so. It's just highlighting the plan that there's the potential for ASR to meet those needs.
Yes, sir.
And Lauren, just to be clear, option 2 is what you indicated is in the current cycles plan as far as what we used last time?
We used option 1 in the previous cycle, so it included any identified needs, regardless of whether it was municipal or manufacturing, irrigation, mining, or not, whichever.
I guess to that end, Lauren, last cycle when we used the methodology identified in option 1, did ag or irrigation have a need and we had to specify the potential for ASR for that type of use?
We did, for mining and irrigation. And the way that I did it last cycle versus this cycle, last cycle, we were looking at it from the standpoint of mining aggregated over the entire region. This time, we looked at it from the standpoint of county specific. So mining in East County, or, irrigation in Uvalde County, as opposed to irrigation county-wide, or region-wide is greater than 10,000.
I guess where my headspace was going on that was, in my mind, I think of ASR as a treated water supply. And I don't know that that's really something that we would want to utilize for irrigation purposes. And so I was thinking, my mind was going more towards maybe this time just narrowing it to the municipal needs. And so we can just kind of either categorically make a statement to the water board that because ASR is treated, these uses, it's not feasible, potential, whatever we want to say, just to kind of narrow the work band over, I don't want to say a futile exercise, but if we're just checking the box for awareness.
And on a similar note, the regional water planning group may also wish to not consider county other, because it's such a distributed area, and there aren't necessarily entities that have the ability, the wherewithal, the means, the distribution network to do ASR. County other just may not be ultimately an option, or the potential for ASR for those entities may not be very high.
So you could have like an option 2B here.
Yes, sir.
Which would be one of our options.
Lauren, does choosing any of these options have a significant impact on your ability to meet timeline or budget? Doing it within the allocated funds you've been given.
I would say the efforts associated with options 2, 3, and 4 are very similar. Option 1 would be a bit more of a lift, but they're very similar.
Well, just let me explain this to me. Your options 2, 3, and 4 would narrow the scope to municipal needs. I understand the distributed nature of the irrigation needs and the mining needs. You think that issue is also in place for steam electric needs? Same sort of scenario? It's more centralized.
I don't think so, because with steam electric, we know the facilities that are considered in quantifying the demands for steam electric, and there are, I think, maybe 5 counties in Region L that do have steam electric demands. And in this instance, there are no identified needs greater than 10,000 acre feet per year for steam electric. So, right on that list, is steam electric.
I'm looking at the 2021 plan data, and Victoria County, we have steam electric need in 2070. This is 2070 is 18,000.
In the 2021 plan?
Yeah. Maybe that went away because of some trouble. That's possible.
I think you're right.
Furthermore, Victoria, I don't think listed on there, but Victoria has put that.
In the previous one.
Yeah, maybe that's, I'm looking at the previous plan.
Okay.
Information, so maybe David. I'm not certain if you're showing us a new list or the list from the previous.
This is the list based on the needs for the 2026 plan that we have now.
Yeah, I've got a question, I'm sorry. I've got a question. I guess, looking at these options, I think option 2 is probably the most effective one, only because irrigation and manufacturing, aren't those unmet needs? And we can have where the needs are unmet, but with regards to gloves, those have to be met. And so one would presume that again, an ASR, going back to the Jonathan State, an ASR should produce drinkable water, so therefore to meet the needs of the gloves, where as opposed to these others that you can have unmet needs in the plant. It's logical you would go with option 2 versus option 1. Also, option 2 is less work than option 1.
Would you mind speaking a little bit?
So option, my feeling is option 2 is a lot better, it's for many reasons. Obviously, Mr. Jonathan talked about ASR, we're talking about needs that need to be met for this plan, and ones are needs that need to be met. Industrial, ag, those are needs that need to be unmet in the plan. And for the simple sake of expediting this process, option 2, 3, and 4 are quicker and faster, as opposed to you indicated option 1 to take a while. So for me, it would be option 2.
And again, in addition to that, it's also the likelihood of ASR being implemented and being appropriate for those ones like manufacturing. It's very low. So it's almost like it's a judgment call of is it worth even doing an evaluation of those entities if we already know it's unlikely. Yes, ma'am.
If we are doing likelihood or reality kind of narrowing down, like not for entities that use treated water, should we also be looking at the complexity and cost of ASR and whether you would build such a facility for 10,000 acre feet? Perhaps we should be looking at narrowing it down to the ones that need more water because that would be more realistic.
That's a very good one.
I don't know the answer to what is realistic. How about you, GBRA? Could you tell us?
We have all the answers, Diane.
Yeah. Well, you are sauce.
Let's use a real example we have right now. MBU has an ASR, so I don't know how many they have an ASR.
How much?
I don't know what it is.
7,000 acre feet.
7,000, it's less than 10,000. So
Okay.
if you use your logic, you probably take out some of those utilities and they want to be an ASR that's within the region, like San
Okay.
Francisco, for example. I would say keep it at option 2 and let's move on.
Option 2 without the county other, maybe.
Yes, maybe like the option 2B,
Yeah.
2, but without county other, similar distributed problem, so.
I'll move to adopt option 2 without the 2 county others listed in it, which we call option 2B.
I'll second.
A motion is second. Is there anyone who would support one of the other options or check and see?
Not necessarily one of the options, but just another question. How deep would the scope of work be? Let's say we choose option 2A or whatever. How deep would your scope of work? Is this just a theoretical exercise ultimately? Of maybe there's a potential of an ASR somewhere.
Right. It's purely desktop analysis. It's based on available reports and scientific data. There's no modeling involved. It's very high level.
And then another question. I don't know if this fits in there, but the Medina Lake. I don't know if you got irrigation. I don't know if that's part of the irrigation. Obviously, there have been in the past discussion of Medina Lake with an ASR. I don't know where that fits in there. If that would be a part of it. It's not exactly municipal needs, but it sort of is. And it's kind of a hybrid.
So irrigation Medina is included in that option 1. They do have identified needs greater than 10,000 acre feet per year by 2080. And on a separate note, there is a water management strategy that we will be evaluating that is aimed at a regional ASR project in Medina County. But those are sort of separate things.
We have our motion and second. Since we have multiple options here, I'll go ahead and take a vote. So all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? No opposition. Option 2 with the removal of the county other, is what the planning group desires.
Thank you. Moving on to major water providers, this is going to be a similar discussion where we're going to be asking for your input and about different options. So major water providers is also a somewhat new topic, newish requirement. We had it in the previous plan. And so this slide is providing some background about what a major water provider is. And so the board has this definition in the blue box. showing that it is a WUG or a wholesale water provider of quote, particular significance to the region's water supply, and it can include public or private entities that provide water for any water use category. So that could include municipal WUGs in addition to the irrigation, mining, manufacturing, livestock, steam electric. And so the regional water planning group would then define or select major water providers. And the impact of that is just that there are certain chapters in which we would provide a quote snapshot of information specific to those major water providers. So we would already be compiling and doing, preparing the same exact information, but it might be sort of in an appendix, or it would be included in the TB27 reports. But if they're a major water provider, they would be specifically highlighted in a section or a table and say chapter 2, where we would be identifying population, water demands, and contracted sales or something like that for chapter 2, and we would do another little snapshot for chapter 3. So it doesn't have any bearing on policies or anything like that by defining who these major water providers are. And so the diagram on the right shows this universe of what the major water providers and what some wholesale water providers are. So the really big circle is all of the different water user groups in the WUGs. And then there's another circle on the left showing all of the wholesale water providers. And there's a bit of overlap there. There's some entities that are both WUGs and wholesale water providers. And then the major water provider is in the middle, and that can be any combination that you all choose. It can include wholesale water providers only, WUGs only, combination of WUGs and wholesale water providers. And so in Region L, we have a total of 224 WUGs and wholesale water providers. And when I say 224, that also includes like irrigation, Uvalde County, irrigation, Medina County. So all of those for irrigation, manufacturing, mining, and so forth. So basically, there are 21 counties, we'll find that times manufacturing, irrigation, mining, and so forth. So that's why it's such a large number. But those are all the different entities you could choose from. And so in the 2021 plan, the definition was all wholesale water providers and any municipal water user group with more than 20,000 acre feet per year in demands. And so these 9 entities were identified as major water providers. Most of them were wholesale water providers, and a few were WUGs, like Victoria and San Marcos, are just WUGs only. Some of them are a combination of WUGs and wholesale water providers like SOS. And so we're asking you all, again, to consider these different options and scenarios. If you have any others that you would like to consider, those are obviously on the table too, for what Region L selects as being, quote, a major water provider. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to be a definition. You could just say you want this handful of major water providers. I just wanted to provide you sort of an objective analysis. And so option 1 could be, let's just keep the 9 from the previous plan and carry those forward and say these 9 are the major water providers. The second option is applying that same definition from last time and applying it this cycle. And we end up with 9 entities, and there are 2 wholesale water providers, and there are 7 WUGs or combination WUGs and wholesale water providers. Option 3 is the same definition, but elevating the threshold from 20,000 acre feet per year in demands to 30,000 acre feet per year in demands, and that ends up with 5 entities. And then option 4 is a combination, basically 2 and 3. So it would be focusing on wholesale water providers with contract demands greater than 10,000 acre feet per year. So it's those 4 entities in the top shown there, plus WUGs or wholesale water providers or combo with 2080 demands greater than 30,000 acre feet. And so with that one, we end up with 8 entities. So we've got 4 wholesale water providers and 4 WUGs and wholesale, or combination WUGs wholesale water providers. we're gonna show there. Any thoughts?
Why does it matter, what we set as the threshold? Does that then provide or give you additional work you have to do? Or is it just naming them?
Regardless of how you get to the point of naming them, there's no bearing on our level of effort in terms of how you name them. Just once you name them, then comes our effort. And it's, if you name a lot of entities, that's gonna be a lot more effort on our part. If you name a handful, it would be similar levels of effort.
Any of these would be similar.
I think so, yeah. I think option 2 would be a bit more effort, obviously.
Option 2?
Option 2 would be more effort than 3, and more effort than 4.
Right.
Mainly because those, with the wholesale water providers, the snapshots that we provide, a lot of times they're not really applicable to just the purely wholesale water providers, because they want things like population projections for each decade, and wholesale water providers don't have population projections. But with WUGs, or combination WUGs wholesale water providers, they do. So from that standpoint, option 2 has many more WUGs in there, so it would require a bit more effort.
So in the previous plan, we used option 1, correct?
In the previous plan, those 9 entities were selected using a different definition. So if we were to apply that same definition this time, there would be 9 entities. Those are 9 entities in option 2. So, yes. And again, you can just identify whichever ones you think are major water providers. You can go through this list and say, CRWA, GBRA, and, or something along those lines. And say, those are our major water providers, and then we'll designate them and we'll evaluate them in those little snapshots.
Comments, questions?
I'll move to try option 3. Adopt option 3.
Motion for option 3. Second. Second. Second for option 3. Any comment on the motion? Discussion? No discussion, so move to a vote. Go ahead and do the same thing. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? You guys have it. Option 3 is adopted.
Is this going to make a difference down the road in any funding opportunities by having this different definition or different designated?
No, sir, it doesn't. The intent is really to highlight to the reader that these entities are considered significant in the planning region, and here's some information that's already included in the plan, but we've compiled it and gathered it and put it in a more conspicuous location.
Okay.
Yes, Lauren's correct. Our board definition of a major water provider is a water user group or wholesale water provider of particular significance to the region's water planning supply as determined by the regional water planning group. And it can include public or private entities that provide water for any water use category. So essentially, these are entities where you want to highlight and focus regional water planning efforts.
Focus the reader's attention on the outcome of our efforts. Has no impact on the outcomes, approval of projects, and that sort of thing.
That's correct.
So by not having the significance, by Victoria being eliminated by taking option 2, so we're not gonna put any effort into helping Victoria down the road, or it's not as much effort to help Victoria as we would one of these that are listed here on option 2.
So if Victoria were not included as a major water provider, it has no bearing on funding, it has no bearing on whether or not we would include your water management strategies or any prioritization of those strategies. It is really just, as Mr. Andrew said, it's focusing the reader's attention on information that's already included in the plan. It's just pulling it out from those sort of buried places and focusing reader's attention on that information for these particular ones.
If you say so. Thank you.
Kind of as an aside, so Canyon Lake Water Service Company, I'm assuming, Texas Water Company, is DB27 still identifying them as this name? Or if we're gonna if they're now gonna be highlighted for presentation purposes, not for any assistance or funding, but just being highlighted as an entity that exceeded the threshold for presentation purposes, I think we need to call them what they're going by these days.
Right. So we won't be able to change their name in the DB27 reports.
Okay.
Because that should pass in 2022. However, in any location within the narrative of the chapters, we will make sure that we identify Canyon Lake Water Service Company, parentheses, Texas Water Company. Is that the correct terminology?
I believe. But that would be applicable to this conversation, this presentation, this narrative, right?
Yes, sir. So, if they were designated as a major water provider, we would have a table that shows population, water demands, decades, and we would put as the column all the different lugs, and we would put Canyon Lake Water Service Company, parentheses, Texas Water Company.
Because they're in option 3, which is the motion that I think, right?
Yes.
Cool, thanks. I'll stop talking.
So moving on to water management strategies, this is the bulk of our conversation today. And this is a similar slide that we've seen in the previous few meetings. It provides the schedule for providing us information so that we can incorporate any strategies into the plan. So the first deadline was providing initial project information and being able to request any new strategies in this plan. That date was July 1st, so that date has since passed. And then in terms of option 2, provide all information to technical consultant for water management strategy evaluations. So again, we are coming to you all at the November meeting with fully formed evaluations. And so we need enough time to have all of that information to evaluate it and then present to you all. And that includes things like the environmental impacts, cultural impacts, water availability modeling, and so forth. And so if you have a strategy that falls into the block 2 strategies, provide that information to me as soon as you can. Contact information is over there on the right-hand side of your screen. So this is the list of water management strategies that have been identified to date. There are 31 strategies. And then, if you might recall, when we did the scope of work back in February meeting, we included this item number 2, additional water management strategies as necessary. It was basically a bucket of money that could be used for any additional strategies that that would be identified between that February meeting and now. And so that number 32, we're going to be talking later on in a different agenda item about the weather modification strategy, which has been requested for incorporation, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. And so the timeline and the process for strategy evaluations are today, the August meeting, we're presenting you all the block 1. So basically half of those 31 water management strategies, we're presenting those to you all today, and then asking for your input on certain strategies that we need direction on. And then at the November meeting, we will then present to you all the fully fledged evaluations for Block 2, and then provide you all the opportunity to consider and recommend which strategies you want to actually include in the 2026 plan. And then based on that, we'll do the cumulative effects analysis for Chapter 6. And that will be presented to you all at the January meeting. And so this slide takes that list of all of those water management strategies and identifies which ones are in Block 1 and which ones are in Block 2. And so the ones that are in green underlined text, those are the ones that are in Block 1, and those are the ones we're presenting to you all today. And you'll notice that, if you recall, we've got basically items 1 through 13 we're kind of calling umbrella strategies. So different water user groups, also water providers, can provide strategies or projects that fit underneath those. So if, say, Crystal Clear said they've got a freshwater water management strategy that they would like included in the plan, that would then fall under item 5. They also have a brackish, I believe, groundwater strategy, and that one would fall under item 6. So we'll be presenting, 5, 6, along with the other ones, in November. So those umbrella strategies include lots of different projects from lots of different water user groups. 14 through 31 are those that are, they could fall under those umbrellas, but in consistency with previous plans, they're sort of highlighted because they are a particular significance or size, or involve a major water provider, or are an innovative strategy, or something like that. So before I begin the evaluations of the Block 1 strategies, I wanted to provide a few notes and disclaimers. So first off, all of the water management strategies are evaluated uniformly and comply with Regional Water Planning Group rules. And they also incorporate the Region L specific evaluations that go above and beyond what Regional Water Planning Group rules are with regards to the environmental analyses. All of these summaries that we're providing here are in draft form, and I have added the word draft to every single slide in this section. Subject to change, we've gotten input from sponsors to, in terms of whether there are updates or changes from the previous plan for those strategies that have been carried forward. So things might change between now and November, and then they may change between November and the final plan. So another disclaimer is this, the third bullet point. This may look familiar to you all because this disclaimer about location maps is placed as a text box on top of every single strategy's map in the plan. And it's basically trying to convey that the locations of these projects are purely conceptual. They're based on regional water planning. They may not actually represent where the projects will be located or are anticipated to be located. We've done our best effort to estimate the locations so we can then pull that information into the costing tool. Because if there's a pipeline, we have to do hydraulic analyses about pipeline diameter, pump stations, and geologic information, and land acquisition, all kinds of information. So that's the reason why we even have locations of pipelines in these strategies. So purely conceptual, locations are subject to change. Several of these strategies are new. Is there a question?
Yeah, on the water management strategies, and I don't know if this is correct, because I don't know what you're doing or not, but on the ones that are based on groundwater, are you incorporating the analysis of the groundwater availability model in the DFCs?
So
where does that fit in to this analysis that you're doing here? because I assume that we're using the 2022 GMA, the groundwater availability models, to improve the Wilcox.
So the evaluation for these strategies must consider whether or not it fits within the MAG. So we're not looking at the GAMs or considering the DFCs because that's all inherent within the MAG. And so what I'm presenting today.
I'm saying the same thing.
I'm sorry?
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, I meant to say MAG.
Okay. And so what we're going to present today doesn't necessarily indicate whether or not it fits within the MAG. So when we present it to you all in November, we'll have a better idea because we need to consider all of the strategies before, because we wouldn't, if there are two strategies, groundwater strategies in the same county that we're presenting today, and then another in November, and let's say it's MAG limited, I don't want to tell you the yield and then have to reduce them both.
So this does not include an assessment of the MAG.
Not what I'm presenting to you
What
today,
you're
but it
presenting
will.
today. But when it does, that MAG will be based upon 2022 MAG, since the GMA will not have produced any updated MAG won't be utilized until 2031.
That's correct. So it's, all of these strategies have to fit within the MAG from the 2022 MAG rules. 2022. Yes, sir.
Before you move off of this point, is there a place within the various chapters of the regional plan, or is there anywhere else that we document the methodology for evaluating water management?
Yes. Chapter 5.2 basically there's a several page sort of preamble that describes the methodology for evaluating the strategies on the basis of environmental, cultural, yield, reliability, water loss.
Does it address how strategies are evaluated relative to the MAGs?
I don't recall.
Could it?
Yes, sir. We can do that. If we have an
I would very much be interested in that. Maybe.
Great.
Thank you,
So several strategies that we're presenting today are new, and we've indicated that with a little sort of stars, yellow stars, you'll see it. And then several strategies are carried forward from the previous plan, and some of them have been modified. And so we've identified in red text whether or not there have been changes to either yield, addition of the water treatment plant, addition of the pipeline segment, addition of pump stations, additional wells, whichever. And then there is, from most of these strategies, we have included a slide about environmental considerations and cultural considerations. So in the previous planning cycle, there was an environmental strategy evaluations subcommittee, work group, that basically developed the approach and methodology that strategies will be evaluated on from the standpoint of environmental factors. And so this was the over and beyond what the planning group rules and requirements, but over and beyond what the Texas Water Development Board's rules and requirements are. And so part of that evaluation included an assessment score of 0, 1, or 2, which you'll see in a legend in a little bit, as to whether or not there needs to be additional consideration when implementing a particular project. And so another item to note here is the status of state and federally listed species and proposed listings. And I'm going to invite Christine Westerman from SWCA. They're responsible for doing the environmental and cultural assessments, and she's going to provide a few additional comments on this.
Thanks, Lauren, and good morning. I'm glad you gave me a chance to get up and walk because I'm freezing.
Me and you both.
I just wanted to give you a couple of quick updates about some of the issues with federal and state listed species. On the federal side, we've had some new species that have been listed or proposed to be listed since when we did the 2021 plan. One that you are probably aware of is the Central Texas freshwater mussels had been proposed to be listed and were just finally officially listed in June. So that's a pretty new development. There's also, there's tricolored bat has been proposed to be listed as endangered. And the tricolored bat has a very wide range. It could occur throughout most of Texas, pretty much in any place that has wooded areas. So I wanted you to just kind of, you're going to see on our water management strategies summaries that tricolored bat is going to show up on almost every slide because it has a wide range and it's kind of a generalist species. It could become listed this year or maybe not. Sometimes these things are hard to predict. But that's definitely a species that we're keeping an eye on. And also, whooping crane is going to show up in a lot of water management strategies because the Fish and Wildlife Service includes it on county lists, any place it could fly over. So don't get too concerned about that. We will be seeing it show up. On the state listed species, the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department has not updated their county species list since September 2023. They are supposed to be updating it again this September. So we didn't do a lot of summarizing of state listed species for today's presentation because those lists are pretty out of date, but we're hoping to be able to get them updated in the next few weeks. And just a general note on the cultural studies, almost all of the water management strategies are going to state that cultural resources or archaeological studies are going to be required. And a lot of that has to do with the conceptual nature of the projects. We don't know the exact size and impacts right now, so at this point we just know they're probably going to need further studies. Are there any questions on anything like that?
Good, thank you.
Thanks.
Ms. Gonzalez, we received a comment from Mr. Krusky regarding agenda item 9.
Okay, Mr. Bisky said, with a large majority of the agricultural needs in the Oasis Basin, the Oasis River Authority is able and willing to become a wholesale water supplier in order to sponsor the agricultural strategies that were detailed during the rural outreach meeting. We have the desire and team to help move these strategies forward. That will be an agenda item, maybe an item, is it 9? 9. We'll discuss that in a bit more detail. Okay. So, we can start off with the first water management strategy. This is the first of 15 or 16, and this one is advanced water conservation. And I'm inviting Alicia Smiley up to present several of these so that you don't have to listen to me for 2 hours.
Good morning, everyone. The first strategy I want us to start with in our list of strategy evaluations is advanced water conservation. This is a strategy that it applies the conservation of water over and beyond the passive water conservation measures from federal and state legislation. Those conservation measures have already been incorporated into the GPCD projections for the municipal WUGs, and so this strategy is anything beyond that. The TWDD requires the regional water planning groups to recommend GPCD goals for each planning decade for municipal WUGs, consider conservation for WUGs with identified needs, consider any issues as identified in the TWDB water loss audits. And this last part is new for this planning cycle. We have to distinguish and separate conservation strategies and projects, whether they are water loss mitigation or water use reduction. So what does that mean? Water loss mitigation as a conservation strategy will include capital improvements and non-capital improvements. So capital includes leak detection and repair, non-capital includes loss audits and anything associated with mitigating water loss. And then water use reduction, the main capital improvement associated with use reduction is the implementation of AMI or smart meters, and the list that you see on the slide of non-capital improvements. And not to say that these strategies don't cost anything, they still do have an associated cost, but there's not a project associated with the non-capital reductions. To develop the yield for this strategy, per TWDB guidance, we have to establish the GPC goal. And so for all municipal WUGs, we've decided to apply this for each planning decade. We applied a methodology very similar to the last cycle. And that is to apply if a WUG's GPCD is above 140. So this 140, first of all, is a threshold defined by the Water Conservation Implementation Task Force. Each WUG should try to have at least try to reduce their GPCD down to 140. And they also have a realistic goal of 1% reduction annually. And so if a WUG has a GPCD above 140, we are applying a 10% decadal reduction. And once they reach that 140, no matter what decade, the following decades will be a 2.5% reduction until you reach the threshold of 80. So there are 4 WUGs within the Region L planning area that have a baseline GPCD of less than 80. So that is County Line SUD, East Medina County SUD, Port O'Connor Improvement District, and the Randolph Air Force Base. But if, for example, a WUG starts at a 90 GPCD, we start applying the 2.5% reduction, and they reach 80 by the middle of the planning cycle, we will just keep them steady at 80. For the GPCD goal. It's also important to note that San Antonio Water System has chosen to develop their own utility-specific conservation goals, which they provided to us, and any municipal WUG is able to provide us with their own goals in lieu of this methodology. And so we take those goals and we multiply by the anticipated population to determine the yield of all advanced water conservation strategies. So the yield is essentially the purple circle that you see right there. And then we take that total yield based on the GPCD goal and break it up into different components. So we have leak detection and repair, AMI, and then the non-capital improvements to sum up into that yield as we defined at the beginning of this process. And so you have a handout that has corresponding yields that break everything out, and so the colors match with the colors on the sides. It's the big 11 by 17 sheet. But overall, the strategy does yield in 2030 16,000 acre feet, and by 2080, the yields increase up to 136,000 acre feet. Does anybody have any questions?
Yes, sir. I've got a question.
Yes.
Entity I represent, who actually work for County Line, is not even on this. So, just a question. How do I make sure they're on this table?
Are they not on the table? Did you
No. County Line, sir?
We'll make sure they are. if they're not, it's gonna make sense.
I'm gonna throw down here doing something.
Understood.
Do you think your GPCD is under 80? I saw that footnote.
Oh,
Says y'all was like that.
No, wait.
You're under 80, that's why.
Oh.
There we
It
go.
was right there. I mentioned them.
I just didn't know
Oh, there you go. I wasn't paying
if you feel that that is accurate. We can talk offline.
I don't need any more water. Do you?
Thank you. I'm sorry.
If you wanted to be included though, if you have a different GBCD goal, if you wanna go below 80, you are welcome to let us know and we'll ask you.
Thank you for the footnote. I am here. I am doing something.
We're doing something.
GBRE's paying attention too, just for the record.
No way.
Let the notes reflect.
Make a motion to execute.
If you have any more specific comments, express them or send us an email, and we will be continuing to develop this chapter evaluation. The next water management strategy I wanted to discuss is non-municipal water conservation, and specifically we are discussing irrigation conservation. This is a new strategy for this cycle, and as Lauren said at the beginning of this presentation, we have worked very closely with the Rural Community Outreach Work Group to develop and really hone in what is needed, what is realistic, and this is the fruits of that labor. And so we have, this cycle, we have 13 counties identified with irrigation needs, totaling about 72,000 acre feet per year, and the majority of these needs are in the Nueces River Basin. And so what the work group did is we identified the appropriate irrigation measures and strategies. So we brought to the work group a lot of different strategies that could have been evaluated, and then the work group went and selected the most realistic strategies. And then we went and developed a methodology to determine the yields and costs, and then the total evaluation. And this is the result of that. Similar to the advanced water conservation for municipal, this is a multi-component strategy. And so those components that the work group selected are soil moisture monitoring and irrigation scheduling, real-time use metering and monitoring, and soil conservation tillage. And so we evaluated each of those strategies individually, we costed each of those strategies individually to sum up to the total irrigation conservation water management strategy that will be included in DB 27, although the write-up for this plan will include the breakdown of all three of those. And the components included are the data gathering and monitoring technology for the real-time use metering and the soil moisture monitoring and cropping and management practices as defined in soil conservation tillage. This slide right here is just a detail of what the work group went through together and the methodology that we decided was appropriate. And then in total, the yields for irrigation conservation yields about 2030, in 2030, about 3,945 acre feet per year, an increase up to 15,000 acre feet per year by 2080. And the costing for this strategy is established if all of the water user groups that it was recommended for implemented all the costing as established in the assumptions for a unit cost of about $336 per acre foot. So, does anybody have any questions on irrigation conservation?
We're good.
Okay, fantastic. For For drought management, we have 2 water management strategy updates that we want to provide. The first is for municipal, which has been provided in previous cycles. The second is for irrigation, which is new for this cycle. So the municipal drought management strategy is demand reduction associated with the activation of DCPs or water restrictions during dry periods. And it's recommended for WUGs with municipal needs in any decade, or WUGs with municipal demands that are required to submit a DCP. So earlier in this presentation, Lauren talked about the 38 entities that are required to submit DCP. So those 38 entities are included in the strategy evaluation. We took the TWDB provided drought management costing tool and used that to help estimate the economic and hydrological impact of reductions. And so the yield is a total annual reduction of all household water use due to drought management implementation, but this is only for irrigation, so household irrigation specifically. This does not take into account any other reductions. The graphic that you see on the right, those 4 components are what goes into that drought management costing tool. And the cost is the total annual cost of the foregone water use. But for this strategy, we do need input from the Regional Water Planning Group for the user supply reduction, percent reductions in use. What is a realistic assumption of curtailment, whether by DCP, whether by restriction, for these specific WUGs. Okay. And so we have 4 different scenarios that we are providing to you today. 5% reduction, 10% reduction, 15% reduction, and 20% reduction. So again, to note the footnotes, for the counties, Goliad, LaSalle, Refugio, and Zavala counties don't have any WUGs within the drought management strategy, which means they don't have any WUGs with municipal needs, and they also don't have any WUGs that are required to submit DCP, so they are not included in this. In additional, Bear County yields do not include SAWs because they have utility-specific yields, which I'll talk about on a separate slide. But overall, if we choose the 5% yield strategy, then basically ranges from 6,000 to 14,000 acre-feet per year from 2030 to 2080, and up to 20 to 24,000 to 59,000 acre-feet per year over the planning horizon. And last cycle, we went with the 10% reduction assumption. Okay. Okay, we went with the 5% reduction.
Good, is there any conversation, questions?
How did that 5% work out last time?
In terms of volume, in terms of costs?
More, volume more than cost.
I'm not sure, I don't have that information off the top of my head, but given that the demands now are greater than the previous cycle, and if we applied the 5%, then it would be significantly lower from the previous plan. As you recall, in the previous, when we discussed this 5 years ago, the planning group ultimately decided the 5% based on the costs, because the costs were just so much greater. I mean, it's 2 times the cost for 10% versus 5%. And so they all felt like it was more appropriate, more conservative approach.
Yes, sir.
I'm sorry, can we go back to number 2, the non-municipal water conservation irrigation?
Sure.
I noticed that Atascosa and Frio counties were not listed. Can you explain that again, please?
Yeah, it was only recommended for counties with irrigation needs. And so these 13 counties listed right here.
However, if the planning group wants us to apply it to all counties with irrigation or all counties with irrigation, which should be all 21 counties, we can certainly do that. And by doing so, those projects, I believe, would be eligible for SWIFT funding. So that's the downside to not recommending it for all counties, as opposed to just those counties.
I believe that those two counties do have quite a bit of irrigation.
Certainly, it's just that they don't currently right now, I mean, based on our water supply analysis, there is sufficient water to meet those needs. And so, that's why it wasn't identified at this time. But again, if the planning group wishes to have it as a strategy for all counties, we are happy to apply it.
Just question I think y'all said you applied the 5%. What would happen if you applied the 10%? Why don't we do that? What's the impacts there?
So we go back to management?
Yeah.
Okay.
Going back to the other slide.
Yeah, going back to drought management, we haven't gotten to these slides yet, but we did do a costing evaluation, and it would increase the unit cost, the total cost.
It doubles the yield, it doubles the cost.
Mm-hmm.
So with the cost of the water management strategy of conservation, is that?
Yes, it's doubling the cost of the strategy itself, and the strategy uses this drought management costing tool, and the costing tool estimates the costs associated with foregone water use, which is a very complicated.
And this is not conservation, this is just reduction of use during drought period. That's what this is right here.
It's basically activation of drought contingency plans.
To be consistent with the last plan, I recommend we do 5.
So we have a motion for the consistent with the last plan to do the 5% reduction. Is there a second?
Before we go, I would like to ask one question, just for comparison purposes. I know SAWS has done an individual, program for drought reduction. That's why they're not shown here. What percentage reduction were they showing in their plan?
Here it is, they are requesting a 10% reduction.
So they're pledging a 10% reduction versus the 5% currently in this cycle's plan.
That's correct. And as you noted at the staff work group meeting, the SAWS's yield is about 26,000 to 35,000 acre feet. So that would be the savings for this strategy just for SAWS. And if you go back one slide, or a few slides, the yield for the 5% for the entire region, minus SAWS, is 14,000 acre feet. So if you were to go with the 10% at 29,000 acre feet per year in 2080, that would essentially be comparable to what just SAWS is planning to implement.
Any more discussion on, we have a motion and a second on the 5% right now. Is there any other discussion on that one?
That's the only point I'll make, and I would encourage, a 10% reduction versus the 5, looking forward. One of the things that figures into this calculation, if I understand what you presented correctly, leak repairs and savings along those lines are significant in relation to, achieving these yields. I think, utilities recognize increasingly that, leakage has to get, controlled better than it is currently moving forward. I think the 10% speaks to that more clearly than the 5%. And many utilities have pretty high percentages of loss, so, I think it's certainly an achievable kind of number. And I think the improvements in piping and the operational cost savings associated with leakage reduction, I think would offset some of the costs shown, as far as achieving that reduction. So just food for thought. But I'll be voting against 5% for that reason.
And it's much cheaper water than new water.
Yes.
Well, I should note that leak detection and repair is part of strategy number 1, the advanced municipal conservation, not drought management.
So I've had a withdrawal of the original motion. So Charles has withdrawn his motion. So, but right now though, the floor is open if there's another motion that someone would like to make.
I'd like to move that we adopt a 10% reduction for use this summer.
Second.
Okay, so we have, now we have a motion for a 10% reduction. Is there discussion on this, further discussion on this motion? All right, is there anybody opposed to the motion as presented right now? All right, having no opposition, then 10% reduction would be accepted by the group.
Thank you so much. The other drought management strategy we wanted to discuss was irrigation. And this is specifically demand reduction associated with irrigation, voluntary reductions of groundwater during severe drought conditions. And so this is recommended for irrigation WUGs, again, demonstrating needs similar to the irrigation conservation strategy that do not fall under EAA's jurisdiction, and that is because EAA already has their own curtailment plan during drought periods. And in overall, methodology is similar to what we just voted on, is irrigators would voluntarily have a 10% reduction of groundwater use. So we have no costs associated with the strategy. However, the TWDB will provide a socioeconomic impact analysis, which will show an impact of costs on the local economy if those crops are not grown, and it varies county by county. And again, this strategy was presented to the Rural Community Outreach Work Group. And overall, this strategy yields about 8,675 acre-feet per year, and that's again based on the groundwater usage for non-EAA irrigation counties with needs. The environmental and cultural consideration is it would be a temporary dying or dormancy of crops. That's everything we have for that evaluation. If anybody has any comments or questions, or if not, I will move forward. Okay. The last strategy I want to present to you all before I hand it back to Lauren is rainwater harvesting. This is new for the 2026 Regional Water Plan, and it's based as we are featuring this because it has been requested by a number of WUGs in our supply survey. And so we are recommending it for Bernie, Kirby, Kyle, Leon Valley, Port Lavaca, and Poteet. And what this strategy is, it's a demand reduction on a whole WUG level that's associated with residential users collecting runoff from the structure. And so we classify it as a demand reduction because it's reducing the demand on the treated municipal supplies. And so how we developed the strategy overall is we assume that 10% of households with one catchment area per household will implement small scale rainwater harvesting starting in 2040. So this is not, so small scale is a catchment area, or is about a 2,000 gallon cistern. And so per TVWDB and other studies, we found that a catchment area of about 2,000 square feet, so typically a roof, yields about 1,000 gallons for 1 inch of rainfall. So we looked at the rainfall data, considered the limitations in capacity, and figured the yields for these individual wells. This strategy has a small footprint, and so there are no significant environmental or energy consumption impacts. It does reduce the runoff, which may improve stormwater quality and flood impacts, and it conserves and reduces the use of surface water and groundwater for residential irrigation. And so we are assuming that 2,000 gallons is pretty much exclusively for irrigation purposes. For costing, we found that a household system with 2,000 gallons costs about $8,000, and these costs are borne by the individual homeowners. We recognize that WUGs can provide incentive programs, and those would be much lesser cost. However, for planning purposes, the development board does have us put the full cost, even if it's not paid by the WUGs. Does anybody have any questions or comments?
Back to the yield of this, are you assuming the yield at 1,000 gallons per inch of rainfall?
Yeah, so what we did was we took dry year rainfall, so 2011 month by month rainfall in individual counties. And so you were able to figure out how much you can actually realistically capture each month. And the upper limit, so if you have 3 inches of rainfall, you can realistically capture about 3,000 feet, or 3,000 gallons, but you're limited by the size of your cistern. And average household water usage for irrigating lawns, I believe in Central Texas, is about 1,800 gallons a month. And so we're assuming that you're continuously cycling through that.
And what, I guess 2011, just because it's a drought year as opposed to the drought record time frame or something. We're planning for the drought record, I'm trying to understand the 2011 versus.
Yeah, so we looked at the rainfall in 2011 because the drought record for the Nueces Basin is 2011. The drought of record for the San Antonio and Guadalupe basins are the 1950s droughts. So it was really just a matter of which data is more available and reliable. That's why we chose 2011.
And you're correct that this has to be a reliable supply during drought record conditions, so the yield does take that drought record conditions into account.
I should also note that these are just the entities that have requested this strategy for inclusion for themselves. If there are other entities that want to add this for themselves, we can certainly do that. Just reach out to us and let it. Also, if you would prefer to have a different storage amount, we can apply that for either strategy-wide or specific utilities.
If there are no other questions, I'm going to pass it on to Lauren. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, so surface water rights strategy, this is carried forward from the previous plan. I'm going to go through this one pretty quickly just because there are currently no project sponsors associated with this one. And the surface water rights and the next one about balancing storage is included as strategies to explicitly recognize that the planning group supports these activities and that they are consistent with the regional water plan. It includes things like transferring water rights between willing sellers and willing buyers, and then also adding diversion points or types and places of use for existing surface water rights. Again, there are no WUGs that currently have projects associated with this strategy, so there aren't any components, yield, costs, and this is consistent with the previous plan and I believe plans before that. There are no questions. I'll also move through this balancing storage one quickly because it's very similar. This one is also included explicitly to recognize and support the region's, for the region to support development of storage facilities to store surplus flows during when times are plenty, for use during drought. And so that could be needed to firm up supplies, provide river diversions, or interruptible groundwater sources, and also to ensure that supplies are delivered through long-distance conveyance facilities that are necessary to meet daily and seasonal demands. Again, no project sponsors, yield components, costs associated with the strategy at this time. If there are no other questions, we'll get into the nitty-gritty of the more in-depth water management strategies specific to project sponsors. The first one is the Alliance Regional Water Authority, ARWA, expanded Carrizo-Wilcox project. It used to be known as just the ARWA Phase 2 project. I changed the naming convention to be more descriptive and consistent with the other projects. This strategy has not changed since the previous plan. The sponsor is ARWA, and then it is sold to multiple entities. And then the source of supply is groundwater from the Carrizo-Wilcox aquifer in Caldwell County. The yield is 21,000 acre-feet per year, and it includes a well field, water treatment plant, expansion of 28 MGD, a transmission pipeline, booster pump station, and 2 10 million gallon ground storage tanks. Again, back to the disclaimer and notes, all of these locations are shown here, are conceptual and for planning purposes only, meant for this evaluation and for costing. This is a summary of the environmental and cultural considerations. A lot of the next environmental slides, as Christine mentioned, are very similar. They are based on the geographic locations of all of this different infrastructure from that map that I showed previously. The scoring, the assessment rating legend is shown on the right hand of the screen. If it's a 0 rating in green, then there are no, concerns or considerations or precautions recommended. Number 1 rating is minimal concerns with precautions recommended. And then number 2 is the highest rating, meaning additional studies are recommended. And so this strategy has 2s for all of the different components that we evaluate, for vegetation, land use, and agricultural resources, aquatic resources, threatened and endangered species, and cultural considerations. And we took that information and input it into the updated uniform costing model from the board and developed these cost summaries based on 2023 dollars. It includes capital costs, debt service, O&M, power land acquisition, and environmental mitigation. This particular strategy uses a peaking factor of 1.5 and has unit costs of $1,500 per acre foot per year.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
On your unit cost, do you show the cost before, after debt service? This presumes during the 20-year O&M period.
Yes, it does.
So then once you remove the debt service, then it becomes just simply the operating cost. And do we present it that way?
I believe, I could be wrong, but I think the unit cost is the annual cost divided by the yield. And so
With or without debt service?
The annual cost, there's an asterisk right there, and it says it includes debt service amortization at 3.5% for 20 years.
Right, and after, what I'm asking for is, what is the operating estimate of unit cost after debt service? Or
Okay.
without the debt service?
I don't have that off the top of my head.
Is that something we include?
It's not something that we typically include in, I don't even know if the UCM quantifies that.
Okay. I have seen it in other plans, so I was asking because the operating cost is significant. It's a nice way to have a comparison once you remove the debt service cost associated with capital.
If you are looking at the UCM and the report that it exports, yes, that O&M is a line item, but it's not,
But we don't do that. We're not doing
it's usually reported as the UCM output is usually included in the plan, yes.
Okay, so we report the annual cost of water before debt service, which is at $15.79. And then we also report the annual cost of water after debt service, which is $710.
That's what I was asking. Thank you.
Well,
But we're not showing in these slides.
yes, sir.
It's an interesting comparison when you look at capital intensive projects, desal paving project, ocean desal versus pumping projects. It's nice to understand where the cost associated with unit costs are coming from, whether it's coming from your capital investment and debt service, or whether it's coming from the operating maintenance costs going forward.
Sure.
Those are pretty important
If
issues.
you-
You're comparing apples to apples.
If you would like for us to basically reformat the slide going forward for block 2, we can add a row for unit cost after debt service.
If the information is in the appendix and someone's interested enough to want to see it, they'll find it as long as it's available. I have no preference. I'm not used to seeing it without. I always look at it before and after debt service.
Okay.
But actually, after 20 years, you're back into capital costs because you're having to rehab wells.
Oh, absolutely, I understand that.
So you're back into that service for another 20 to 30 years.
But you're not building new wells. We can have that debate for some other time.
So, as I mentioned, each of these strategies has a costing summary table that's included in the plan. It's included in the write-up of the plan, not an appendix. And so, if you would, it's quantified, it's there. If you would like for us to include that in this presentation in November, we can simply add a row and add that information you've already got.
I think Region N does it that way. That's what I was asking. It's Region N in their project summary for the unified costing, they do show that separation.
In the plan or in the presentations of
In
strategies?
the plan.
We have it in the plan.
Okay. As long as
Do you want it in the presentation too?
it's helpful for me, but
Okay,
it
we'll
may
add
not
it.
be relevant.
Yes, sir.
One suggestion perhaps, maybe if you included a reference to the fact that that information is included and in what section, or if it's in the appendix, in the asterisk description here, you know, you kind of go two birds with one stone, but we give them a pathway to find it if they want it. If they're
Sure.
comfortable without it, you know, they can skip that step.
Thank you. Okay. If there are no other questions about the ARWA Phase 2, we can move on to ARWA Phase 3, which is the direct potable reuse project. This project is the same as the previous plan. It includes direct potable reuse of San Marcos's wastewater treatment plant effluent. It would be treated via reverse osmosis. We quantify that as an advanced water treatment plant of 5 MGD. And the project would take San Marcos effluent, treat it, and then the brine or RO reject water would then be conveyed to the city of Kyle's wastewater treatment plant. I missed a step, sorry. The San Marcos wastewater treatment plant effluent would be commingled with the brine rejects, commingled and then sent to the Kyle wastewater treatment facility, commingled with their wastewater effluent, and then discharged via their existing outfall into Plum Creek. This project includes the advanced water treatment plant, 5 MGD, pump stations, a booster station expansion, a 1 million gallon ground storage tank, transmission pipelines, and then the map on the right again shows purely conceptual information and locations. No changes have occurred since the previous, since this project was included in the previous plan. Environmental and cultural considerations are shown here. They have an assessment rating of 2 for all of these different components. I don't believe there's anything of particular significance for this one in terms of this slide. And this is the costing summary with the unit cost including with debt service of $2,700 per acre foot per year. Are there any questions about ARWA Phase 3? Moving on to Citadel Valley Local Government Corporation CDLGC Carrizo project. This includes CDLGC, which is a wholesale water provider made up of Schertz and Cibolo. The project includes Carrizo low-cost aquifer water from groundwater from Wilson County. The yield is 11,802 acre-feet per year. One item to note here is shown in red because it has changed since the previous cycle. I think it may have been 10,000 acre-feet per year in the previous cycle. So the yield has increased. The components include well field, transmission pipeline, a 12 MGD water treatment plant expansion, and this 34-mile shared pipeline pump station from SCTRWPG facilities in Guadalupe County to the city of Citadel. And again, all of the infrastructure shown on this map is conceptual and for planning purposes only. Environmental and cultural considerations are rated for 2 for each of these subcategories. And these are the costs in September 2023 of $2,062 per acre foot per year, including debt service. Yes?
You know, I brought it up earlier, and the reason I asked the question about the unit cost before and after debt service is particularly on groundwater projects where projects are being, the water is being secured from private entities or private landowners. There's a royalty that carries with it that goes along with the O&M cost. So it allows you to separate it out and show the unit cost with debt service versus the unit cost after debt service. Because after debt service, on groundwater projects where you're buying water and paying a royalty to the landowner, that will show up as an additional expense that may not exist in some of the other ones. In some areas, it allows you to see whether you're paying $300, $400, $500 an acre foot or $50 an acre foot for the raw cost of the water coming from the landowner in these type of projects. That's where that distinction, I see it most often.
Okay.
You know, but so we don't know what the projected cost is in these type of things. Maybe they haven't secured the water rights, or they haven't secured the contracts, or anything like that. But it would allow us to see in the unit cost after debt service, would allow us to compare those type of projects.
That's all. Thanks.
I don't know if I'm asking really a question, other than to reiterate my earlier comment.
I do have the unit cost after debt service in the rapid right now. If you
Right,
want.
it's all right, let's continue this along.
Okay. The next strategy is the Ruffles Utilities MU Aquifer Storage and Recovery Project. This project includes an implementation decade of 2030, and it would treat, excess treated water is the source of the ASR, which is a combination of surface water from the Guadalupe River, Canyon Reservoir, and groundwater from the Edwards Aquifer. The strategy would store 14,000 acre-feet per year in the saline portion of the Ed's Aquifer with a yield of 7,000 acre-feet per year during the repeat of the track record. The well field for withdrawal is 9 wells. The information shown in red is updates, changes from the previous one. And the environmental and cultural considerations, assessment ratings are shown here. Twos for most of them, except for aquatic resources, and that's primarily because this project does not have any infrastructure that crosses streams, rivers, aquatic resources, essentially. Yes, sir, Mr. Sellers?
On the 14,000 acre feet a year of storage, are we presuming that they're only putting 14,000 acre feet in when it's available, and then withdrawing when it's not available? That's right. It's not actually 14,000 acre feet every year. It's when it's available.
I think it's that they would maintain a storage amount of 14,000 acre feet.
Oh, so they're going to store that much. That's not how much is going in.
I believe so.
Okay.
It's not that they're
So it's
putting
like
14 every year.
2 years of withdrawal, basically, is what they're storing.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
And here are the costs for the MBU ASR project of $617 per acre foot per year. Any questions on MBU ASR? Okay, moving on to MBU Trinity Wellfield expansion. The implementation date is 2030. It includes groundwater from the Trinity Aquifer in Comal County. The yield has a 3,900 acre feet per year with components of a wellfield expansion, water treatment plant expansion of 3.6 MGP, ground storage tank of 3.6 million gallons, and a pump station expansion. Figure shown here, again, conceptual planning purposes only. And this one has assessment ratings of 1 for the vegetation, land use, and agricultural resources, primarily because there's not as much disturbance of land and soil, given the smaller footprint. And again, the project does not cross any streams or rivers. However, the project area does contain mapped wetlands and ponds, and there will likely need to be some sort of minimal concerns and precautions associated with designing the project and implementing the project if there are wetlands and ponds. And then endangered and threatened species has an assessment rating of 2, the cultural considerations has a rating of 2 as well. And here are the costs. This one is based on a peaking factor of 1.04, has a unit cost of $2,046 per acre foot per year. Any questions on the MBU expanded Trinity Wellfield?
Before we go too far into the San Antonio system and several big projects, I want to talk back about the ARWA Direct Potable Reuse Project. Under environmental and cultural considerations, under aquatic resources, they said project will require on-site delineation of streams, additional studies recommended. Does delineation of streams mean they're changing the route of the streams?
No.
So that is the baseline study to determine, this is what?
Hold on the thumb button. Hold it down.
I think it's working now.
Yes.
Sorry about that. So that is the baseline study that would be done, especially focusing on the pipeline routes to determine if it's crossing streams and rivers and what the boundaries of those are for determining impacts to those water bodies and when the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers permitting would be required.
Okay, and besides that, I had one other concern that I thought might be needed to be under aquatic resources, and that is that Plum Creek is a, what do you call it, 203B contaminated stream that has one of the first watershed protection plans in the state of Texas, and it's not really making a lot of progress, I don't think, in that there's so much population of cities discharging into the stream, plus agricultural concerns, that the stream is not improving a lot. And so I know that's not an issue for us to regulate, it's TCEQ, but I think it warrants mentioning.
I agree with you, and the plan will identify TCEQ, identified impaired streams, and we can also add the information about the watershed protection plan.
Thank you.
Yeah, I could be wrong, correct me, Christine, if I'm wrong. I believe most of the evaluations consider impacts to streams if they cross, if a pipeline or if a project sort of crosses or has some sort of geographic overlap with an impaired water body. We do have a whole discussion about the 303D list and impacts to 303D impaired water bodies. For this one, you're right. The Kyle wastewater treatment plant, it discharges into Plum Creek. So even though it doesn't cross the geographic boundary of Plum Creek, there would potentially be aquatic resources impacts of this project on Plum Creek. And that would be obviously something that the TCEQ would do the water quality modeling and so forth for, but we will make sure that we include a description of potential impacts to Plum Creek and to mention that watershed protection plan. Any other questions? So the next one is the SAWS Expanded Local Carrizo Project. This one was carried forward from the previous plan. The implementation decade is 2030. It includes groundwater from the Carrizo Wilcox Aquifer in Bexar County. It includes 3 different phases. Each phase has a yield of 7,000 acre-feet per year for a total project yield of 21,000 acre-feet per year. The components include 12 wells, and 3 well fields, and an integration pipeline. Please note that the water treatment plant shown here on this map is not actually included in this water management strategy. SAWS has chosen to include that as a separate water management strategy under the facilities expansion. That was the case in the previous plan, carrying forward that into this plan. Again, of note, it's not conceptual in nature. Does not represent exact locations of facilities and infrastructure components. And with this one, we have the environmental and cultural considerations, has assessment ratings of 2 for each of the component, or each of the categories that we evaluate them on. And these are the costs in September 2023 dollars, with a unit cost of $185 per acre-feet, but per year. Any questions on that one? If not, SAWS Expanded Brackish Groundwater Project. This one is also carried forward from the previous plan with a few modifications. The implementation decade is 2040. It includes brackish groundwater from the Carrizo Wilcox Aquifer in Wilson County. There are 2 phases. Phase 2 has 13,440 acre-feet per year. Phase 3 is 8,960 acre-feet per year. That yield has changed since the previous plan. And the yield is now the total project yield is 22,400 acre-feet per year. The components include a pump station, transmission pipeline, 2 well fields, water treatment plant expansion of 20 HED, and brine disposal via deep well injection. Again, map, components, conceptual things. It has environmental and cultural consideration, assessment ratings of 2 for each of these components. And of note, this one does talk about the impacts to aquatic resources because in the project area, those 2 well fields include 2 impaired water bodies shown on the 303D list. And the unit costs are $1,800 per acre foot per year, based on EV factor of 1.
Can we go back, excuse me, to 25? Project 25, yeah, I was comparing all of these. The next one. Back one. Project 25.
Project 25?
Yes.
It's page,
Oh, okay, sorry, project 25,
yeah,
which slide?
The first one.
expanded local Carrizo.
How are in casting that visual, I understand it doesn't show facilities, but how is that blue area, shaded area constructed or devised?
As in,
What
where did we
what does
get
that
these
represent?
ovals? Okay, the ovals represent an estimation of the locations of the well fields.
Not impacts.
No, sir.
So this, I'm just pointing out, it's on the Bexar County, Wilson County line.
But it doesn't go
ever
into.
cross into Wilson County.
No, it doesn't.
As to the well locations themselves.
Right. That this polygon, this oval, does not cross into Wilson County at all. And so the impacts, the environmental impacts are based solely on what's in this blue oval.
Okay. I apologize for having that. I'm curious what that oval.
Give me the slide number next time.
I'm sorry.
Any questions on the SAWS expanded brackish groundwater project? So, one thing to note, right? So on this one, the yield changed, and that is because in the previous plan, this project had 4 phases, phases 2, 3, 4, and 5. And so SAWS has chosen to strip out 4 and 5 and create a new strategy called the Regional Carrizo Project. And so that's what this one is. So these were previously known as phases 4 and 5, but now they're known as phases 1 and 2 of the Regional Carrizo Project. So a lot of the information shown here is carried forward from the previous slide, or from the previous plan, but for purposes of this plan, it's new.
What was called?
Let me clarify a few things. The Regional Carrizo Project is a different one in Gonzales County, or at least we call it. The expanded local Carrizo Project is freshwater down at this location. Brackish Project, we have phase 1 and phases 2 and 3. Separately, we have another brackish project, which is the Regional Wilcox Project. So you can find a lot of those together.
So there are 3 strategies shown here. There's number 25, 26, and 27. So number 25 was the one that had 4 phases in it, and we stripped out phases 4 and 5, correct? And we pulled them into this regional low cost.
Number 25 was the Carrizo in Bexar County.
And I just completely confused.
So that's not correct.
Which correct?
Okay.
If I can provide a little clarification on what Mr. Burton's going through, and thank you everybody for the discussion.
Yeah.
Expanded local Carrizo is Carrizo water in South Bexar County, 3 phases, 7,000 acre feet per phase, 21,000 acre feet. It's carryover from the 2021 regional plan. The implementation decade changed slightly.
But and that's project 25.
That is project 25, Dr. Brown, that's correct. Yes.
And that's the Carrizo.
Correct.
So then when we move into this project 26.
This is where there was a little change. With the consultants for the 2021 plan before Ms. Gonzalez took over, it was recommended for ease of putting the plan together in the remaining time frame to combine our current brackish project in South Bexar County with an expansion which we now call the Regional Wilcox, which is brackish. So it was all lumped together. In the 2021 regional plan, phase 1 yield, which is currently online, was identified as 13,440 acre feet, which you'll see up here is the same for phase 2. Through implementation, we weren't able to obtain the full 13,440, Instead, it's 11,200. So that delta, Dr. Brownlow, was moved to phase 3. So phase 2 remains the same for the 21 plan. Phase 3 went up slightly. The total volumetric yield remains the same in the plans.
But this is Wilcox water.
This is Wilcox brackish water across the county line in the Wilson County.
In those two floods.
Exactly.
Okay. So then the third one, I guess we ain't got to do that. Okay, that's
Project 27 is a separate and new, different.
Separate and new Wilcox project further south central city county.
From the, it's probably further
east, excuse me,
southeast, but yeah.
And this also is brackish water in the Wilcox.
And this is carryover from the 2021 regional plan, and based on conversation with the previous representative, Director Savage, the location was moved slightly to accommodate Director Savage.
And then reminder, when you get into the MAG discussion, next meeting or the meeting after when we address the managed available groundwater, recognizing that in the MAG, they combine the Carrizo and Wilcox volume to determine from the DFC to the MAG.
Correct.
So there will need to be a separation of that and some enhanced understanding of those impacts. You understand what I'm saying? The MAG
combines
the fresh and the Wilcox and the Carrizo as a total volume.
Right, and it is included in the DFC and MAG through 28.
Exactly, but the volume is combined, so it needs to be separated out. That's part of the analysis.
If that's something the regional water plan did.
Regional.
That's what we have that conversation.
Exactly. Appreciate it. Thank you.
So this is the South Regional Wilcox project. Thank you, Donovan and Stephen, for the clarifications.
Thank you.
There's so many strategies. So the yield for this one is 50,000 acre feet per year. That is 32,000 acre feet per year for that first phase, and then 18,000 acre feet per year for the second phase. The components are well field expansion, pump station, ground storage tank, transmission pipeline, 44.7 NGD water treatment plant expansion, and then brine disposal via deep well injection. And the map.
Lauren?
Yes, sir.
I don't know if it matters, but you still have them labeled phase 4 and phase 5.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Oversight. Thank you. The map components, infrastructure is all conceptual. Environmental and cultural considerations have assessment ratings of 2 for all of these. And the costing summary shown here, $2023. Based on a peaking factor of 1, it has a unit cost of $2,897 per acre foot per year. Any questions on this one before I move forward? The next one is the Shirt-Seguin Local Government Corporation, SSLGC, Expanded Brackish Wilcox Project. This one includes an implementation decade of 2040. I've shown the implementation decade highlighted in yellow because that's not what's shown in your packet. I added it between when the packet was posted and today. So the source is brackish groundwater from the Carrizo Wilcox Aquifer in Gonzales County. The yield is 5,000 acre feet per year. And the components include a well field expansion for withdrawal and also injection of the brine disposal, water treatment plant expansion of 5 MGD, and a pump station. Infrastructure is all conceptual. It has assessment ratings of 2 for each of these different components. And the unit costs are $1,500 per acre foot per year, based on the peaking factor of 1.25. Any questions on this one? So the next one is the SSLGC Expanded Carrizo Project. And this one is freshwater, and the implementation decade is 2030. It includes groundwater from the Carrizo Wilcox Aquifer in Guadalupe County. The yield is 6,000 acre feet per year. The components are primarily the same, with the exception of There are two pipeline segments that have been added to this strategy since the previous one. They're a little difficult to see, but they are shown here because they're going to be parallel pipeline segments. The first one is here, and the second one is right here, next to the well field. Other components are two well fields, 6 MGD water treatment plant, pump station, shared transmission pipeline with CBLGC, and the transmission pump station and storage tanks. And these all have environmental assessment ratings of 2, including 1 impaired stream segment crossing. And the costs are $4,741 per acre foot per year. Okay, that completes agenda item 7. We're almost done. We're almost done.
All right, so moving to agenda item 8, consideration of appropriate action, technical consultant to evaluate weather modification of the new water management strategy.
So I'll give a little bit of background before we invite Mr. Riggs and Mr. Robbie to speak to this. So the reason why we're coming to you today is, if you recall, many moons ago when we talked, I don't know, 50 slides ago, about the additional water management strategies, that item 32, that's that bucket of funding that would cover evaluation of water management strategies above and beyond what we initially scoped in February. And so when we came to you all in May, we did a similar request where we asked for a request from you all for us to utilize a portion of that bucket of funding to evaluate the Medina County Regional ASR project. So this is a similar request where we were requested to add this weather modification project into the plan. And it's currently not a project that's scoped in the list of water management strategies. And so we are coming to you to request use of that, a portion of the bucket of funding for those additional strategies to evaluate this project. And so the information listed on this slide is high level, conceptual. This doesn't, this is not meant to be the water management strategy evaluation because we have not yet evaluated it. That's why we're coming to you all to request that funding. This is a project description based on the information we've been provided so far. I expect that we'll have additional information that we would need to evaluate the project if you all approve use of funding for it. The map shown on the right shows all of the counties that the South Texas Weather Modification Association currently implements weather modification policy for. Those are shown in the dark blue patch, and that includes several counties within Regional, and it also includes 3 counties outside of Regional. And so the project yield shown here of 117,000 acre feet per year is based on evaluations that the South Texas Weather Modification Association has done and provided to us, but I took out the estimated yield associated with non-regional counties. Another thing to note is that when I quantified this, I think it was based on the 2022 or 2023 report provided to us by the South Texas Weather Modification Association. Moving forward, if this is evaluated, I would instead look at the 2011 information, because the 2011 would be the draft record. So that yield shown there of 117,000 acre feet per year, it would likely be lower. So I'd like to invite Mr. Golden Riggs to speak to this if he wants to.
I can speak from here, I believe. Lauren, thank you very much for bringing this to our attention and working with us. But today I've asked Mr. Stephen Robbie, who he's familiar with me with y'all, to give us a greater explanation of this. And because of his expertise and knowledge, he can handle this better than I can. Thank you, Mr. Robbie.
Thank you, Weldon, and members of the planning group committee. It's a pleasure to be here before you, speaking in a much different capacity than I've had the pleasure of doing for the past 6 regional water plants. So I am a board member of the South Texas Weather Modification Association, and just for background, the South Texas Weather Modification Association was formed in 1996, and its members are groundwater conservation districts and county governments. And those entities fund the South Texas Weather Modification Association through a per acre assessment. The South Texas Weather Modification Association has also been contracted by the Edwards Aquifer Authority to provide weather modification services in the EAA's western counties. So, Region L has historically had a challenge identifying water management strategies for unmet irrigation needs. And, weather modification is a strategy that can help meet unmet irrigation needs, and then also to provide irrigation water conservation savings to reduce irrigation water demands, through precipitation enhancement. So, on behalf of the South Texas Weather Modification Association, the review requests that the Regional Water Planning Group identify weather modification as a potential water management strategy, and authorize the evaluation of weather modification to meet the unmet irrigation needs for the countywide irrigation water user groups. And Lauren, thank you. I somehow forgot that Bandera County was in Region J, but I do have them listed in my comments here. For Bandera, Uvalde, Medina, Bear, Atascosa, Wilson, Frio, and Corns counties. Also requests that weather modification be included in the advanced water conservation strategy for ag irrigation. Now, we're requesting it specifically for the counties that the South Texas Water Management Association, Weather Modification Association is operating in. The planning group could make this an umbrella strategy, so that if there are areas that are currently not implementing this particular strategy, then it would be included in it could be considered consistent with the regional water plan if they chose to. Of particular note is the Dimmitt, LaSalle, and Enzaval counties. Now, as Lauren did mention, the South Texas Weather Modification Association has provided Region L's technical consultant with some technical analyses that document the effects of weather modification in this area here. And they were prepared by Dr. Ruiz Columbia with Texas Tech University. And then we've also provided additional information regarding the current infrastructure, equipment, and operating costs that are required to conduct the weather modification activities. So with that, that concludes my remarks. I'll be happy to try to answer any questions if you have any. Yes, sir.
I actually have a question for Lauren, although you may be able to answer it. As far as new supply coming from a water management strategy, this looks like the largest single amount I have seen. Is that correct? Is there any larger new water supply from a water management strategy anywhere else in the plan?
I don't believe so. There are demand reduction strategies that might come close to this, but no new water supply strategies.
It's because there's so many
add,
counties.
Lauren did mention that that amount was based on the 2023 analysis report from Texas Tech. If it's approved for evaluation, she would use the 2011 analysis, which is a very dry year.
Yeah.
Now, with irrigation, it doesn't require firm supply to be in the plant, unlike municipal water usage groups. So,
and then I just want to be clear about, cloud seeding, right? So this is, there's moisture in the air that may or may not fall anywhere, or it may fall somewhere else. And what the cloud seeding is doing is trying to make it fall in these areas. Is that right?
That's correct. You have to have clouds capable of producing rain in order to seed. And we're using the current technology. South Texas Weather Modification Association, along with other weather modification associations in Texas, have worked with USDA and have come up with a new technology using just regular water, ionized water, that has the potential to greatly increase productivity of cloud seeding. So these are the kinds of things that as the weather modifications go to state legislators and everything and ask for changes in the program and support for the program. Their question always is, what is in the regional plan? So here we are requesting that.
Right. And because of the question about, it's the moisture in the air, clouds, that it's moisture that may or may not fall somewhere else. If this strategy was adopted by all of our neighboring regions, right, it's like robbing Peter to pay Paul, right? If only one uses it, maybe they gain 117,000. But if everyone around you uses it, you might not see that much. I guess that's a question for you, Mr. Robbie, not for Lauren.
Well, and I don't know if I can directly answer that question. That's one of the things that we have Texas Tech University on board with the program to evaluate those kinds of effects.
Okay, thank you.
I would think that that's similar to groundwater. You have everybody pulling from the same aquifers under us. It's a similar scenario.
Yeah, I'm really just trying to make sure I understand the premise, right?
I will add, I think what we're doing today is similar to last meeting. We're asking our consultant to evaluate this strategy, and it will come back to us. Today, we're just going to make that vote to evaluate this as a strategy. So this isn't the approval of this strategy. Consultant will then evaluate it, bring it back to us, and then give us a recommendation, right?
Right. So this would just authorize us to use that bucket of funding to evaluate it. We would then bring the full evaluation to you all in November, present it to you, and then you would have the opportunity of recommending it or not including it or considering it as an alternative. So you can designate it as a recommended or alternative strategy or just not include it. So
as we're discussing, a lot of these numbers will change as they evaluate it. These are just preliminary with presented to the staff, right? So,
yeah, and I recognize in relation to the preliminary numbers, that the costs that are shown, are these for the entire regional, weather modification, or is it only the counties crosshatched? Have we netted out the counties that are outside regional? You can just give me an idea of what the cost, will eventually show in terms of how this will be formulated.
Well, I will say what we provided regional consultant, and she can clarify from there. We provided the cost associated with the Weather Modification Association's operations in all the crosshatched counties.
that's correct. Those are the costs that they provided to us. Once we get into the evaluation, if you all approve it, we would likely end up doing a pro rata share.
I assume we would not treat areas outside of Region L.
Yes, sir.
So, I might add, just for knowledge base, the Evergreen Groundwater District, we budget about $150,000 a year of our annual budget goes to this association. I think there may be some discussion about who may own that airplane. And then the other part is the Edwards Aquifer Authority contributes $275,000, something like that. It's in that. Yeah, $175,000. So that's the majority of it. But the ones that are crosshatched are contributing to the program. I think that
map just shows the overlay on top of Region L.
I have a question. I don't know, Steve, that I know very much about cloud seeding, but I was surprised to see this suppressed hail formation listed up there. Is that how it happens that you make more rain? Is that you take what would have been hail and you convert it to water?
Well, I don't know all the meteorological mechanics of it, but what the cloud seeding does, it makes the cloud much more efficient in taking the moisture that's in the cloud and precipitating it out.
Because you put
And then
particles.
that does change the dynamics that would typically cause hail. And in fact, up in the high plains of Texas, this practice is done primarily for hail suppression.
Well, I think there's a lot of people that would go for that idea, but it's not related to water, I guess.
So Chairman, I move that we direct the technical consultant to evaluate weather modification as a water management.
Second.
Have a second?
Yes, sir.
All right, so we have a motion and a second to consider this as a water management strategy. Is there anybody opposed to this motion? Hearing no opposition, I'll take that as a consensus for approval. So to approve, to move forward.
Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Robbie, for all that information. It's great to see you here again. Okay, the next item is consideration and appropriate action regarding the designation of the Oasis River Authority as a wholesale water provider for regional water planning purposes. We had discussed this primarily in the rural community outreach meetings, because we ran into the issue where there were all of these water management strategies associated with benefiting rural communities, and there weren't sponsors per se that could step up and actually implement the strategies. So the Nueces River Authority would like to be in a position where they could apply for funding under SWIFT or other funding sources that are tied to regional water planning, to then have that funding to actually implement these projects to benefit the rural communities. And so we're bringing this to you all today to approve the designation of the Nueces River Authority as a wholesale water provider, as they are currently not included as a wholesale water provider or what in this plan or in previous ones.
Discussion or motion on this action? Tim, motion, do I have a second?
Second.
Second. All right, so, again, is anybody opposed to the motion on the floor? No opposition, then we'll take it as consensus to approve considering the Oasis River Authority as a wholesale water provider for regional water planning purposes.
Thank you.
Okay, so that brings us through item number 9, Lauren, thank you very much. I know you need some water or something now, right? Item number 10 is discussion of appropriate action regarding establishment of additional subcommittees. I don't have anything, no one's requested any additional subcommittees at this time. Is there any discussion on that? Anybody have Sensing there's no need for additional subcommittees, we'll move on to item number 11. Schedule and potential agenda items for the next meeting. So our next meeting is November 7th. And then looking ahead to 2025, we have a meeting on January 23rd. February 20th is our quarter 2 meeting, quarter 3 on August 28th, and quarter 4 October 2nd. Lauren, do you have any comment on some discussion about 2025 and whether the meeting schedules for deadlines? Do you want to mention something about that?
Sure. So typically, we would hold a meeting at the beginning of August for quarter 3. And we would like to push it back a couple of weeks. And that is because during that long period of time between when the IPP is submitted and this meeting, we will be receiving comments from folks. And the significant portion of our effort is involved with addressing the Texas Water Development Board's comments. And in the previous cycle, they provided us comments sometime in mid-July, and then we met in early August. And that was not enough time for us to develop a fully formed idea of a proposed response to those comments to address them. And so we would like a couple more weeks to develop a methodology to address those comments, and then have enough time to actually have a staff work group meeting to present them to you all in a preliminary form, and then present it to you all more formally at the actual planning group meeting. And then for the Q4 meeting, we would normally have it at the beginning of November. However, the final plan is due on October 20th, I believe, of 2025, and so we want to meet earlier in October, where you would then see, you would direct us on how to respond to the comments in August. We would then respond to the comments in the plan, provide you all the final plan, the draft final plan, and then at the October 2nd meeting, you would then review that plan and adopt it, hopefully, prior to the deadline for submittal.
Do you need an action item on that, on the schedule, or just, I think it all makes sense, so. All right. So moving forward, item number 12 is public comment. I do have a request for a comment, Rachel Swinsky.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
this is Gary Middleton. I'd like to make a comment if I could.
Yes, sir, we have one right before you, and then we'll get to you, yes, sir.
That'll be fine. Thank you.
Thank you so much. My name is Rachel Zavinci. I am a constituent. In 2015, several other water captains and I appeared before this same South Central Texas Regional Water Planning Group as volunteers of Texas Interfaith Center for Public Policy, also known as San Antonio Interfaith Power and Light of San Antonio, or San Antonio Interfaith Environmental Network. We presented a white paper response to the 2016 draft plan, and each read sections of the Region L IPP white paper during one of these meetings. I appreciate today seeing that the conservation strategies for which we advocated are now being included in the 2026 plan. Thank you for your openness to constituent recommendations. Regarding item 8 of today's agenda, I draw your attention to the Edwards Aquifer Authority news drop of July 2023 article, EAA's Precipitation Enhancement Program, on pages 6 through 7, which reads in part, for over 20 years, the EAA has been involved with a precipitation enhancement program, also known as cloud seeding, by partnering with the Evergreen Underground Water Conservation District to perform cloud seeding operations. The actual cloud seeding is performed by the South Texas Water Modification Association, etc. Since its inception, the cost benefit, this is on page 7, of this program is about 70 cents per acre foot of additional rainfall. And in the last 10 years, the cost was approximately $32 per acre foot of additional recharge. I would particularly like to draw your attention to the recording of the first Edwards Aquifer Authority Public Summit that occurred this last year, where they invited community leaders to come interact with the leaders of the EAA. I was one of them. And I asked quite a few questions of the director, Roland Ruiz, and of their consulting meteorologists, which they answered in depth. And I'm a little surprised that they were able to answer so much more specifically than what you've heard today. But of course, some of them were along the lines of what Mr. Sowards was asking today. I also asked about the environmental impact of pouring silver iodide, which is what this group uses, into the clouds, because of course it's not without its consequences. And I think what Mr. Ruiz and the consulting meteorologist explained was significantly different than what you've heard today. So I invite you to look at that recording. I believe that many of you would agree with me that weather modification by humans is a poor remedy for us seeking to modify the hydrology by our own continued compaction of soil and expansion of impervious surfaces. And so today I ask you again to think beyond the conventional thinking of water supply to solving problems by decreasing the problems we create. Thank you so much for your service. I deeply appreciate it.
Thank you, Rachel. Mr. Middleton?
Yes, sir. As we evaluate and look at some of these water management strategies, everyone is seeing the cost per acre foot, and the price of water has increased tremendously. Between the time we started planning for water 30 years ago and today, the projects are gotten bigger. The scope, the facility cost, the power cost, everything keeps increasing, and the ratepayer, we're going to reach a point you can't afford water anymore, which is a horrible thing to even think about. But I'm asking that we consider a statement in our proposed legislation that we recommend to our legislators that for water infrastructure projects exclusively, that the Texas Water Development Board look at expanding. Instead of a 30-year maximum, we start looking at 40 and 50-year financing options that would actually make some of these projects increasingly be able to get funded. And the local people who are paying the rate for water, oftentimes it takes so long to develop these projects that the guy that actually uses the water, eventually down the road, he's not paying for it. It's the people now who are having to pay for this stuff, who it would allow the expense to be passed to generations several decades down the road, who are actually going to use the water that's being planned for and developed today, maybe to help facilitate these projects from physically being completed and paid for over a longer period of time. And I know it takes legislation to be able to do that, and I'm only asking that the state consider this for water infrastructure, projects that they're going to last beyond the 50-year window. So I just think it could be a recommendation, and I think it bears discussion amongst the group at a future meeting. And so I bring it up just for consideration amongst the Regional Planning Group to at least think about the pluses and minuses. And I don't, want to get into the politics of it, but it certainly could help cities and water providers be able to afford to do these projects by extending the payment period back to the state and the revolving fund, SWIFT funding and other things. I ask we consider it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Middleton.
Okay, I don't know if you were gonna say something, Mr. Andrews, but, in response to that comment, Mr. Middleton, we're having a Chapter 8 policy and legislative recommendations for group meeting, and it will be held virtually at 1:30 today. So if you wanted to recommend that at that meeting, we would welcome your comments, and we can certainly, the work group can consider adding it.
If it's available online, I'm not in San Antonio, so if it's available online, is it going to be on this same webinar or whatever we're calling this?
Gary, I can send you the link for it via email.
Okay.
For members of the public, the link to get onto that call is available on our website, the regionaltexas.org website. There is a meeting notice posted there.
It's 1:30 today?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Thank you.
Any other comment, public comment from members? All right, with that, we reached item number 13, we're adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.